Las Vegas. It's more than just a city. It's a feeling. It's that feeling of excitement when you spot the lights of the strip out the airplane window. It's that feeling of awe as you stroll down the boulevard, taking in the sights and sounds. And it's that feeling of satisfaction, knowing that you're in the greatest city in the world. Over 42 million people from around the world share that feeling every year. And I'm one of them. Taking you to the world-famous Vegas Strip and beyond, my name is Jeff. And this is Jeff Does Vegas. I'm going to be totally upfront and honest with you. This episode of the podcast is very likely to piss off a lot of people, but everything that's going to be said here needs to be said. During my last Trip Report episode, titled Not the May Trip Report, I brought up a lot of things that I didn't enjoy about the city, and in turn, my vacation. I got a lot of feedback about that episode. A few people agreed with me, but a lot of people thought I was just being whiny. Now, at first I thought I was going crazy. Maybe it was just me. But shortly thereafter, I started noticing a lot of the same comments popping up on various Vegas-related social media channels, as well as similar complaints coming from other Las Vegas content creators, including bloggers, vloggers, and podcasters. Then it happened. Sam Novak, creator of the Vegas Unfiltered blog, who's been a guest on the podcast before, wrote an article for Vegas411.com titled, "This is the Worst Time in History to Visit Vegas." Sam joined me for a conversation to talk about the article, as well as the current state of affairs in Vegas. And as expected, he was brutally honest about what's going on. We talked about how construction is messing up the city, angering both locals and tourists. The skyrocketing costs when visiting Vegas, including all the new random fees and service charges that people are seeing, as well as how tipping culture has gotten completely out of hand. We talked about the overall state of the Strip, including aggressive showgirls, street merchants, and filthy hotels. And I asked the big question, when will it get better? Will Vegas turn back the clock and be that city that we all used to know and love? Now, I do want to apologize. There were some issues with Sam's video feed, and as such, this is a very stripped-down video version of the podcast. So I invite you to head over to jeffdoesvegas.com and take a listen there if you'd prefer. In the meantime, I hope you enjoy my conversation with Sam Novak as we discuss what the hell happened to Vegas.
When I sat down to write, I was actually worried I may lose my job over this because I'm writing for a website that essentially promotes Las Vegas, and now I'm saying, don't come. And that's putting my neck out there.
So, I mean, what was it that really inspired you to take this step and write this article in the first place?
Well, like everybody else who's been going through this, you get the mounting frustrations, and then you start to realize that even your everyday activities as a resident here are being impacted by what's going on around you. Every time I have to go to a function, and even though I live far outside of the Strip, I have to go to it very often. And I have to think about, how am I going to get there today? What's going on? What are the latest road closures just for today? I mean, you actually have to do research to get anywhere from point A to point B, which is insane. It's not like another city where you have a construction project going on. The entire city is under construction, and I don't think anyone's ever seen anything like this. So when it impacts your daily life, and then I hear from people, entertainers, business owners, that are losing business and they can't function. The reason that they're here in the city is to perform or to provide a service, and they can't do that because one outside agency has taken over the city and nobody's actually saying anything about it. You realize it needs to be said. It's not okay. It's not something that's going to benefit us in the long run, in my opinion. And it's reached the breaking point where the silence has to be opened up and people have to say, this is enough. This is killing the city. Wow. And I'm the one with the big mouth that opened up the can of worms, and it's rolling down the street.
I mean, what kind of reaction have you had to this article from readers, from colleagues in the city, from businesses? Are people agreeing with you, or are people
Mostly?
Yeah.
There are a few that think that this is a city that's always growing and there's always going to be some new shiny object. For this right now, I mean, we just came out of the hysteria of the Sphere. Now we're dealing with the hysteria of the Formula One. Mm-hmm. There's always going to be something new to draw our attention. I mean, before that, we were going through Resorts World and Fontainebleau getting topped off. And when the Allegiant Stadium was erected and we brought the Raiders here, and the talk of the Oakland A's coming and building another stadium on the Strip, there's always something new growing, coming in, something to talk about. But none of them has really crippled us. This particular thing has. And when I learned that the organizers are actually going to build up barricades in front of the hotels and businesses, use public roads, and then build walls to keep people away from what they're going to be charging for, it's hostage. It's ridiculous, and I've never seen anything like this. Now, that's why I really decided to sit down and say, don't come here right now. You're not going to get a good experience.
And I mean, Formula One is just a piece of this whole article that you put together. I mean, you covered everything from the airport to the parking to the costs to the state of things. And these are things that I noticed on my last trip when I was there back at the end of May. And I came back and I of course, I generally put together a trip report episode and I talk about all the things that I've done on my vacation to Vegas. And I actually titled that episode not the May trip report because of all the things that I couldn't do while I was there because of what was happening. And B, just the overall general experience of Las Vegas. It feels like it has changed.
It has. It's always changing, and we know that. It's often said similar to the weather in San Francisco. You know, if you don't like what you see right now, just wait a few minutes and it's going to change. Right now, that's not for the better. We're seeing plenty of change, but it's alarming change. If I didn't live here and came as a tourist, I would probably be very put off like you were, because there's so many things limiting the experience that you may have had in the past. And the things that you can get to are pretty much things that you could do anywhere else. So you ask yourself the question, is it worth it to go through the chaos of the flight situation that we have with air traffic right now and the chaos that we have at our airport to get into a city with limited options, and most of them are things that you could have done at home?
One of the big things that I've noticed in my last few trips has been just the cost increasing and skyrocketing. I mean, meals that my wife and I went out for in March that cost us breakfast that cost us $60 that 2 years ago would have cost us $35. Just if that exactly. It just, everything has just absolutely skyrocketed. Do you think that this is just strictly 100% greed on the parts of the resort owners and the company, the corporations?
Well, it's definitely not just inflation based. We've all seen the rise in our everyday costs of our food, our clothing, our utilities, and travel expenses going anywhere. So that's part of it. But yes, greed is a huge factor here. And there's a mentality that was brewing before the pandemic that people were becoming aware of, that things were being slapped on for absolutely no reason at all. Charges at the bottom of your bill that made no sense. And when you would confront the person sending you that receipt to explain it, sometimes they even couldn't. We're just told the charges. What is it for? I don't know. And those things kept growing and growing and growing. And people like me were getting vocal about it. We were writing reports. We were publishing lists of businesses that were doing these kinds of things, hotels that were doing these kinds of things. Warning, if you still want to go there, great, it's your choice to go wherever you want, but know that you're going to be facing this, this, and this. Then after the shutdown, a lot of those things were removed. They wanted people to come back to Las Vegas. And of course, as somebody who lives here and enjoys what we have to offer, I wanted us to continue to prosper. But as soon as the tourists started coming back again, then all of these problematic charges and removals of services started cropping back up again. One thing that was new was COVID surcharges that were showing up on some restaurant bills, which boggled my mind. I got into a discussion with a public relations person who represented a lot of higher end restaurants here in town. And when I posted about it on my Facebook page with particulars of this place is charging at this places, I recommend you don't pay that fee or don't patronize them. He got very angry with me saying, you don't know what these restaurants are going through right now to recover. I said, and I don't want to know what's going on behind the scenes. What I want to know is that I will walk in the door, get good service, receive the food that I requested, get a bill that shows me the total of my food and drinks, the tax, a line for my optional amount of tip, and that's it. I don't want to be reminded by the business owner that he's going through some sort of a difficulty. That's not my place to know. If you need to increase your costs to function and survive and be profitable, put them into the cost of the food, like always. Don't put a separate line on the bill to say, hey, we're in trouble. Help us out. I did help you out by walking in the door. Now give me what I came for.
I kind of said that right from the beginning when I saw restaurants were adding that, like you say, this COVID fee or whatever, recovery fee or whatever they were calling it onto their bills and charging a percentage. And I always kind of just looked at it and went, I feel like I'm getting screwed way more and nickel and dimed way more if I see all these added lines on, as opposed to if a restaurant owner just says, you know what? We're increasing the cost of everything. We're doing a blanket increase of 5%. I would rather see that than see stuff added to my bill.
And I think most people would agree with you on that. Transparency is an important part of your experience when you're a consumer. You want to know what you're getting, what it costs, and you want to choose to patronize or not. Nobody wants a story. They just want what they came for. Mm-hmm. So that was really a bad precedent, and most of that has gone away. In fact, I can't recall the last time that I've seen that particular charge on a bill. But other things like concession fees and live entertainment fees and things like that are starting to crop up again as well. A generic service charge that they will point out is not for the tip to your server or the busser or the kitchen help. Just a service fee with no explanation. That's another one that's becoming more prominent right now. You always have your detractors who will defend these things, saying, oh, it's like that in other cities. They're cropping. But you know what? Las Vegas isn't other cities. It's always stood apart from every other city in the United States. Just because other places are doing something, to me, would be more of a reason to not do it here. And that's not the mentality that's occurring across the board. It's like you said, it's greed. Oh, they're doing it, so we're going to do it now as well. When I go into one of the major hotels for an event or to see a show or to go to a restaurant, and I go into these enormous parking garages, knowing that everybody driving in there is going to be paying $15, $20, $30, sometimes $50 a day per car that was never ever charged before, and the hotels and casinos function magnificently. Where is this going right now? Straight to the bottom line. When these were rolled out by MGM and the Caesars resorts, they said it was to, and I love this quote, to improve the parking experience. I'm sorry. I mean, when I come to Vegas, I plan on having plenty of experiences, but I don't refer to parking as an experience. And yet, if you go to other cities or other places, their parking garages are usually very well maintained. They're power washed, they're clean, they're picked up. Most of these major hotels, including the Cromwell, which is a 5-star resort, Mandalay Bay, the Mirage, and I can keep going. You drive into these parking garages, you see horrific things on the walls, on the ground. It doesn't look like these walls have been painted for forever. Human waste, horrible odors, garbage overflowing in the cans. And so you ask yourself, where's the money to pay for parking here going? It's not for maintenance. It's directly into their coffers.
And the argument that it's done in other cities, to me, is a bullshit argument because it's done in other cities. So a service fee or whatever, a random service charge at a restaurant, it doesn't matter if it's in Las Vegas, Los Angeles, Seattle, New York, Denver, Toledo. It sucks. It doesn't matter where it is. It sucks.
Now, I'll give a little leeway to say if you're traveling internationally, and that's a customary charge on a bill in a particular country, you are a guest in their environment, and that's the way they do things there. That's fine. A lot of countries are not customary tippers. They don't have a place to tip, and if you do tip them, sometimes they even seem surprised, which is why quite often people from, say, Europe that come here might need to be reminded that we do tip here. That's our custom, and that's fine. I don't have any qualms about that. But beating you over the head with additional tips and lines for particular services, all on one receipt. You know, I got to tell you, I went to a supper club a few weeks ago. Their food is mediocre at best. The prices for what you get are already very, very high. And then they automatically charge you an 18% gratuity. Okay, that's what they do. But it's on one page of the receipt, not on the total page where there's a line with a suggested gratuity in parentheses to add to that total where the 18% has already been added in there. And if I didn't look at the two separate pieces of paper, I would have tipped on a tip and the tax. And I just wrote included across the line, retold on that page, slid it back to them, and yet I felt guilty for doing that like a cheapskate. Like, why am I feeling guilty that I didn't double tip? I don't feel going back there anymore. I could, but I feel like I was fooled and taken advantage of, and I don't feel the need to go back there any longer. And those are the kind of things that we have here in this city when patrons, visitors, tourists realize these things are happening all the time. You don't want to have to be on guard when you're on vacation. You're coming here to be frivolous and silly and cut loose. And I think that's why a lot of the businesses here do those sorts of things, because they probably realize that, oh, they're not going to look. They're just going to total it up, slide their credit card over with it, and go on to the next venue or the next activity, and we got them. That's wrong.
My wife and I ran into that on a trip back. I think it was last December. We ran into that it was at Yardbird in the Venetian, actually. And they handed us our receipt at the end of the meal. And as I was filling it in, I noticed they had put the 18% gratuity on there. And then there was a line for the gratuity. And as you say, if I hadn't been looking closely, I would have double tipped. So, I mean, it was a good meal and good service and whatever. So I added the 2% additional on it to make it 20. But like you say, I felt like an ass because all of a sudden I'm handing this bill back to somebody with what looks like I've written in a 2% tip. Exactly. Right. And afterwards, my wife and I were walking away and we both just thought, like, I'm angry about this because, as you say, you don't want to feel like you have to be checking every item line on your receipt when you're out for a meal.
Yeah. It's always been something, I may be saying this wrong, but if you're going into a bar and you're walking up to the bar just to get a general cocktail in your local pubs or what have you, you pay the fee and then you throw another $2 down. That's fair in your casual pub. Or would you agree with that?
Yeah.
You go into a place like one of the cocktail bars at the Venetian, and if you pay by credit card, the drink is $25 perhaps. Mm-hmm. And there's if you pay by credit card, there's the little gadget, and there's options for 18, 20, 22% on top of that. If you want to hit other and just put $2 on there like you would if you were paying cash, once again, you feel like a cheapskate. So that whole idea has changed too. You're no longer throwing a couple of bucks to the bartender. You're paying as if you just tip on a whole elaborate meal.
Tipping is a real contentious topic with everybody, obviously. And I mean, I get it. Vegas is a city. It's a service-based city. It runs on tips. I am a good tipper. I consider myself a good tipper. If I go out for a nice meal, it's minimum 20%, sometimes even 25 if it's a fancy place and it's high end and they've really gone out of their way to serve me well. But it feels like everybody wants a tip now when you go to Las Vegas. And I mean, it's even like, I mean, you go to a Starbucks on the Strip, and I mean, I don't order a fancy coffee. It's a Pike Place coffee. They pour it out of the coffee maker where it's already made. I get my little cinnamon coffee cake that they take out of a plastic bag and put in a paper bag. And they're now wanting a tip for this. Or you go to somewhere like a Subway and they're wanting, you go to pay with your card and an 18% tip is popping up at a Subway. Mm-hmm. Would you agree that it's getting out of hand?
It's gotten out of hand. I can think of another story along those lines. There is a chain of smoothie places around here, 24-hour. They're called tropical smoothie cafes. I drive through them a lot just to get something green and healthy. Mm-hmm. There's one that's right across from the Virgin Hotels on Paradise Road in Harmon. You drive through there and you order your drink or whatever you're having at the message board or the electronic board, come around the corner, and they hand you the credit card machine to put your card into, and then there's a place for you to toggle through for how much of a tip that you want to put on it for drive-through. And I normally just hit the OK, which is like, I think there's like a default 20% tip on there. You just hit the OK and OK again for total. And then I thought to myself, why am I tipping on drive-through? I mean, they're just standing at a window and doing this and passing it to you. What did I just tip on? Mm-hmm. They didn't come to my table. I didn't sit down. So one time I scrolled through the options and hit no tip. And I pulled out my card, handed it back to her, and the girl looked at it and went, ah, and threw the machine down. I mean, literally banged it down on her counter. Already I'm feeling stupid. I watched my order being prepared. She comes over, she hands me the drink, and I had gotten a breakfast roll-up, like a wrap, a chicken wrap. She had it in a bag. She hands me the drink, puts the wrap on her counter, and closes the door to the window. And comes back, I'm thinking maybe she made a mistake. There had to be a correction to the order, and she's going to give me a fresher one. No, she was angry, came back about 4 or 5 minutes later. I'm just sitting here waiting. Reaches over, hands me that bag through the window and slams it again. She deliberately let it get cold because I didn't tip her. I was blown away. So that's when I realized this is all out of control.
And that's the thing that gets me about all of it and tipping. And again, I'm sure that this conversation that you and I are having about tipping is probably going to piss somebody off because there's somebody out there that's going to equate from this that you and I are terrible tippers. But I've always maintained tips they're earned. It's for somebody that has gone above and beyond to do something for me or has helped me out in some way, shape, or form. And again, like, I get it. Vegas is a tipping town. It's a service town. Everybody works in the service industry. But at the same time, why should I be tipping you $5 on my Starbucks order when literally all you've done is pour me a cup of coffee? You haven't even put milk and sugar in it. I've put the milk and sugar in it. You've poured me a cup of coffee. Right. You've taken a piece of pastry out of a plastic bag and put it in a paper bag. You didn't bake that piece of pastry. I should be tipping the guy that drove the truck there.
Right. Tip, the proper usage of tip would be gratuity. Mm-hmm. Gratuity, gratitude, graciousness. It's a thank you gesture because you gave exemplary service. It has to be earned. It's not, if you don't give it to me, you're going to get bad service. It's gone the opposite way now. Mm-hmm. It's an expectation instead of a gesture.
And I noticed one of the things you had posted in the article was a great photo somebody had put on social media of their receipt, where it was a double tip, like there was a gratuity and then a gratuity for the busing staff, which again completely blew me away. I looked at that and I just thought, the stones of a restaurant to put that on, just the all out balls the size of bowling balls, to put that on a receipt, to have a separate tip line. I mean, when is, not to give anybody any ideas, but when is the separate tip line for the kitchen staff coming, or the cook, or the hostess?
That will come. It will come if people don't object. If people don't hold up that receipt and say, this is ridiculous, I'm giving one tip and I'm not coming back. There shouldn't even be something in their setup to allow for that. Mm-hmm. Just like there shouldn't have been a place to generate a bogus service charge. And if you question some of these businesses that have that service charge, they will say that it is to allow the business to continue to operate by going towards expensive. Isn't that what the money's going to every time you sell a meal? That's your structure to figure out. We're not your accountants. You do math off to the side. Don't ask us to break it down for you.
Something else you covered in the article that I thought and you've covered this in the past as well, is just the overall state of the Strip. And I know my opinion from my last trip, I thought it was awful. I thought everything was dirty, and I mean, garbage was overflowing. There was litter everywhere. It felt sticky, like, if that makes sense. Like, my shoes felt sticky everywhere I walked.
Yes.
People on the Strip, the characters and the showgirls that were out there they're aggressive and they're rude and there's scammers everywhere and there's street vendors all over the place now. That that area outside of the Bellagio, out front of the Bellagio fountain, looks like a third world street market at this point with everything that's going on out there. Am I crazy, or is it getting bad?
No, it has gotten much, much worse. And I don't think that it helped when Bally's literally erected a flea market in front of their casino, which is what the Grand Bazaar shops looked like to me. It always looked like a low-end flea market. They welcomed that because it was an opportunity to generate more income. So the street vendors right across the sidewalk, it's a market, let's do it as well. And unless somebody chases them away, they're going to continue to do that, to the point where you may see someday that the Bellagio is going to erect their own shops in front of the fountain, or start charging for the opportunity to view the fountain show. That wouldn't be outside of the realm of possibilities either. I mean, if they're going to build a barricade for you to be able to look at the cars going down the Strip, it could be easy to envision them in building a barricade to stop you from seeing the fountains unless you pay an entry fee. That's not, it's an expensive attraction. It costs them a lot of money to maintain it. And if they're going to charge for everything else, like simple basics as parking, they could easily charge for that. You think back to a few years ago when they decided to limit the number of times that the Mirage volcano would erupt. It used to be a nightly thing, I believe every 90 minutes perhaps. Then they started limiting it to only certain nights, and then fewer frequencies, until they've decided they're going to pull it out altogether. It doesn't make money for them. Moving walkways, another thing. Remember when they used to have moving walkways to pull you into the casinos? Mm-hmm. The idea was for them to go in one direction, get you into the building, then you will stay, you will dine, you will be entertained, you will gamble, you will drink. That made sense, but they were too expensive to maintain. So even though they could have been generating intangible amounts, the fact that they have a receipt saying this is how much it costs to maintain it, pull them out. If something that you would consider to be a perk doesn't cost someone, a patron, something, is being removed. Mm-hmm. All the attractions like the MGM line exhibit, the White Tiger pool that they had inside the Mirage, all of those things being pulled. I was at the Venetian a couple of weeks ago. I'm sorry, the Palazzo. And the very large fountain that they have, it's about 4 stories tall, and it wasn't operating. It was just, at this point, a statue. And I questioned the security guard that was positioned next to it, why isn't it working? He said it hasn't worked for a while. I guess it costs too much to maintain.
Unbelievable.
You know, I go to places like Puerto Vallarta, which Mexico is not exactly as advanced as we are, yet their airport is spotless, absolutely spotless. You go to other nations, their airports are beautiful. We're one of the busiest airports in the United States. It's a wreck. Uh-huh. It's old, it's dated, it's always under construction. There's always something going on, but does it ever look any better to you? No.
Something else that I noticed, or I felt like I noticed more on the Strip, was crime. I mean, in all the years that I've been coming to Las Vegas, I've never been on the Strip and felt unsafe. I've always you always kind of feel like you're in a crowd. It's okay. There's lots of police. There's lots of security. It feels fine. But over the last few trips, I've noticed it just feels sketchier with the scammers and with the people that are out there again, and stories that are coming up in the news, whether it's stories about robberies or shootings or hotel robberies, things like that. It feels like it's less safe.
It is. I haven't reported this, but I was assaulted in a casino. I was just sitting there playing at a slot machine, and somebody came up behind me and hit me very hard in the head and took off. I've never had that happen before. I'm sure they could have spotted them, had security cameras, but by the time they would have gotten the video footage, the person is long gone. There's an entertainer here in town. I'm not going to mention names, but he had a cousin who was visiting here, who was walking in front of the Cromwell, and some man came and punched him in the face for no reason. He fell down, broke his jaw, split his skull open. He was in a pool of blood. A nurse, luckily, happened to be walking by and did triage on him until an ambulance came. And the family member who reported this to me said that as soon as they got him up off the sidewalk into the gurney, there were people from the casino that were cleaning their bloodstains off the sidewalk. That they didn't want people to see. The actual crime, there was nobody there to protect anybody. The guy even got away. But the image of the blood on the sidewalk was the one thing that they were focused on.
And as I say, I mean, I've heard a lot of stories recently about people having issues in hotels with safety and with security in their rooms. And there was a story a while ago about the Paris and where, to the point where they set up a bait room to try to catch the people and the perpetrators of this. And I mean, in the past, there was always the odd story that you would hear about somebody's room got broken into, and usually it was the case they just hadn't shut the door properly or whatever. But now it seems like you're hearing about this more and more, and it's legitimately becoming a problem.
Yeah. Have you seen the video footage of the woman who was in her hotel room here alone, and she saw a coat hanger or a wire coming from underneath the door and going up to unlatch the lock to get into her room?
Yeah.
Have you heard about that one?
Crazy.
There are an enormous amount of incidents like that we don't hear about. If you know any Las Vegas police officers, they would tell you most things are kept very quiet for the sole purpose of not getting out there for people to know. Come here. They keep it quiet so that these crimes aren't well known. If you ever have you ever been in a casino and you see somebody being wheeled out on a gurney with an oxygen mask on? Have you heard that? It's kind of an urban legend, but truth-based. That if you ever see somebody being taken out of a casino on an oxygen mask, most likely already dead, and they pronounce them dead off the property so that it's not listed on public records that they died in the casino from an overdose or an assault or a murder. So they kind of fudge the truth to keep our statistics lower.
Let's talk about the state of the hotels. And we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier. And this was, again, things that you've you've documented in previous articles and your social media, and I've noticed it recently on recent trips as well. Just sort of the lack of cleanliness and disrepair. I mean, it feels like things, it doesn't matter what level of hotel you're at, whether you're at, as you say, the Cromwell, which is a 5-star, and I've noticed it. I stayed at the Cosmo a couple of years ago, and which is a very high-end hotel with a lot of very expensive rooms. And I noticed things like garbage bags sitting outside of people's rooms for days on end. It's just gone poorly lately. And I know there's a lot of stuff that's kind of behind that direction of things.
It's not because of the lack of funds to keep these businesses maintained and clean. It's a lack of pride. Why bother to worry about something that people may overlook when you could be charging them more for other things? I mean, the major casinos are focusing on their nightclubs and their celebrity chefs and upgrading your room and talking about all these world-class experiences. But the very basics are not being tended to. You go into a restroom in one of these higher-end hotels, you'll see toilets out of order, empty soap and paper towel dispensers, water everywhere. It's easier to throw a out-of-order sign on something than to get it fixed. We'll get to it eventually. When a few more things break, then they'll bring a repair crew in to take care of them all at once. In the meantime, it looks like it does. I ran businesses for 20 years. I was very conscientious about the way something looked to the customer. When they walk in the door, you're making a first impression. In a Vegas resort, their first impression is the grand entryway and the shiny doors and music's playing, the fragrance hits you. After that, that's when you start seeing all the dust in the cracks, or the dust in the air vents, or the dust behind the doors. The housekeeping staffs in all of these hotels have been heavily burdened. They give more rooms and less time to do them, so the employees have to work very quick. They're not going to get everything like they used to. It's not unusual that sometimes to go into a room, and this has happened to me as well. I do stay here, even though I live here. I do the tourist experience. I've gone to hotels and pulled back the sheets, and they were the old sheets from the last guest. And there's body hairs. There is, I reported on this about a friend of mine who's a producer on Broadway. He comes to Vegas. He had a couple of shows that were here, and he was staying at at Resorts World. And he found human feces on his pillow when he checked into the room. He did a live broadcast on his Facebook page. It took maybe 2 hours for somebody to come up and place the bedding in his room at the $2 billion Resorts World. And this was just a few months after they opened, where they should have been at the peak of everything. He was appalled.
I've been amazed with some of the experiences that I've had at the lack of service or poor level of service. My wife and I, when we stayed at the Cosmo, our room safe was locked. It had been locked and shut by the previous guest. And I phoned right away and I said, hey, can I get this open? Well, we'll get somebody up there when we get them there. Well, how long is that going to be? We don't know. Could be 2 hours, could be 3 hours. And I said, well, I assume I have to be here when they come in to do that. Yes. So you want me to sit in my room for the next God knows how many hours, waiting for God knows who to show up, God knows when, to open my safe. We ended up not using the safe for the entire week. We just put our stuff inside our suitcases and locked in. And I thought, if somebody wants to root through my dirty gaunch to get my cash, well, more power to them. But
in the back of your mind, you're feeling insecure about your belongings while you're away.
Exactly. I've got my passport, my laptop, all that stuff is now sitting in a publicly accessible or somewhat publicly accessible area, as opposed to being in the room safe. So
you were gambling without putting $1 down.
Exactly. The whole trip was a gamble. Exactly. So yeah, it's shocking. And I know recently too, I mean, the hotels have done so many cutbacks with staff and with, I mean, housekeeping is now no longer required on a daily basis as it was at one point. So that's been a cutback.
Some places you have to ask for it or you won't get it all.
Which is, I mean, as a person that usually is by myself, and I always joke about how I leave the room cleaner than I found it 9 times out of 10 when I'm there, I usually will only have them in. If I'm there for 3 days, I'll have them in maybe once to take the garbage if I've had food in my room, and that's it. But at the same time, I know there are people who are there for longer periods of time that want them to come in every day to take away towels or change sheets or take garbage or whatever. And for that to go away is baffling to me. The other cutbacks that they've made with self check-in at all the Caesars properties now, which are all through kiosk, and is always a disaster for everybody.
If they work at all. We published an article about the situation at the Rio, which we know that the Rio's in a bad state. However, they on their online check-in, they heavily suggest that you do their kiosks when you arrive there, which we opened up a whole can of worms about the flaw in that system. Because when you reserve a certain type of room, and you're given a choice, a mountain view, a strip view, whatever, and you select that one, when you go to check in, if they don't have those available any longer, the system doesn't say to you, your current room choice is not available, we're going to upgrade you or suggest these options, select one. What you will get is a message saying your room is still being prepared, enter your email address and we'll let you know. One time, waited till about 10 p.m. and still there was nothing. By the time I stood in the line, which was now very understaffed with a long line because everybody else was experiencing, it was almost midnight before I got my room. And I was there at 5 p.m. And when I vented on the agent, I had to be up at 4 a.m. So at this point, at max, I'm spending 4 hours in my room. And she was like, well, you should have just come here to begin with. That was what I was told. And I said, then what is the purpose of the self-serve kiosks if you're told I should stand in the line?
Yeah.
And where are all the agents? It's just you and one other person. It took me 2 hours to get through this line. So yeah, self-serve kiosk idea is a dud.
Well, I recall seeing a post on social media a while ago, and I think it was from Caesar's Palace, where all of the self-serve kiosks were working, but nobody was in line for them because, of course, everybody wants to try to play the high roller and do the $20 trick and slip the guy at a 20 to get an upgrade to a room, which, by the way, I have never had work for me, and I don't think it's really a thing. I will tip if I get an upgrade, but I'm not sledding you 20 to try and get something. But there was this massive line of people that were standing in line for 2 or 3 hours because nobody wanted to use the kiosk because everybody wanted to try to play the upgrade game.
Yeah, you're right about that upgrade situation. I mean, they all see it. The last time I tried it, which was many years ago, she slid the 20 off to the side, gave me the room that I had requested originally. And when she handed me the key, there was this defiant look like, I dare you to say something. That was the last time I did that.
The other thing that you wrote an article about a while ago that kind of ties into this whole how it's the worst time to visit Vegas right now was the cutback in the amenities and the hours, and how Vegas used to be a 24-hour town. And I mean, in the 5 years that I've been coming on a regular basis, I can recall being able to go and get anything I wanted to eat. If it's 3:00 in the morning and I'm coming back from the pub and I really want a patty melt, I could find a place to get a patty melt. I'm struggling for that patty melt now. There is hardly anything open.
Right. I don't get their logic behind that at all. I went to it was a similar situation. I checked in a hotel, I took a lift, meet my buddies out and have some cocktails, come back hungry. This hotel had 3,000 rooms, if I'm not mistaken, and nothing was open, nothing at all. I went over to the reservation desk and vented, and the agent said, well, you could always call DoorDash. I said, and I could do that at home. That blew my mind. She goes, they welcome DoorDash to come into their hotel. No. I want to sit down like you did, order a sandwich, perhaps a cup of coffee. If I've got friends with me, we want to sit down but the coffee shops are pretty much gone. Mm-hmm. When they are open, it's till 2 in the afternoon. In that article, I named specific locations, what their hours used to be and what they are now. For instance, the pantry at the Mirage. Mirage used to have two 24-hour restaurants, the deli and the Creek Cafe. The cafe was replaced by the pantry, and the wall over the entry says breakfast available all the time, or something along those lines. How about 3 o'clock in the morning? No, because it closes at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
It feels like the ownership, the big execs, they just don't give a shit. Do you think that's the case? They're just, as long as the money's on the bottom line, they do not care about the guest experience.
I think that goes hand in hand with a lapse in simple basic logic. When I've confronted business operators about these situations, and I asked, why is it like this? The answer is usually, well, we'll expand our hours as demand requires. And I said, how do you know if you're closed? I'm here right now after hours telling you that I want to be your patron, and the doors are closed. If you're turning away people, then you're turning away business. So the idea of we'll wait for demand is never going to happen if the demand is chopped off at the knee.
And I mean, I can say from the last trip that I had to Vegas at the end of May, it was busy as shit. Demand is there. I mean, it's not like during COVID and during just as things were reopening and there was no international travel or there was limited travel, things like that. The demand is there. I mean, the travel levels are up, the spending levels are up, the room bookings are, the vacancy rates are down. You'd think that the demand is there. I don't understand how they can say the demand. We're waiting to see if the demand is there. The demand is there.
When I published that particular article, I got a phone call from the general manager of a well-known restaurant. He took me to task on it, saying that my logic was flawed in that respect. He says, you're not taking into account the liability issues that we face when we're open late nights and there's the possibility of having rowdy patrons. The belligerency that they might exhibit towards the staff, the possibility of confrontations, physical assaults, accidents, things like that. You're not taking into account the additional, say, the utilities or the operating expenses that they would face if they never had an opportunity to close, clean up, and prepare for the next business day. I said, you're right, I'm not taking those things into account, just like I didn't take into account the matter about the COVID charge when restaurants were saying you don't know what we're doing. Once again, I don't want to be lectured on your difficulties. I want a particular service because I'm here ready to spend money, and if you're not there to take it, you're not making a profit either. Figure out the way to make it happen. It worked before. It worked in the 70s. It worked in the 80s. It worked in the 90s. It worked in the 2000s. How was that suddenly not possible today?
When I get those kinds of replies back to me about stuff, my response is usually, that sounds like an ish you, not an ish me.
Very well said, yes.
Construction chaos in Vegas. And this, I mean, we hit on this a little bit earlier with Formula One. I mean, obviously, I put out a video a while ago called Formula One is Turning into a Shit Show, and got some pretty decent response on that video just because the fee thing from Formula One. I'm an F1 fan. I love auto racing. I enjoy it. My wife and I watch it. We've been watching it for a long time. And even them pulling the thing out of their rear end saying we're going to start charging bars and restaurants a fee, that caught me by surprise. I'm going to be completely honest. Knowing what I know about F1 and Liberty Media and that whole group, it really shouldn't have caught me by surprise. When I saw they put the track route out and the track map out, I instantly went, oh, this is going to suck for everybody. And so many people said, no, it'll be fine short-term pain, long-term gain. It is turning into big-time long-term pain. I mean, this has been months of closures along Las Vegas Boulevard. And it is an absolute, it is a shit show. There's no question about it.
And as locals, we're being frowned upon to speak out about this, to discourage it, to do kind of a negative point of view, because, as I said earlier, it's the next big, shiny new thing. But that's not the case. Regarding this new article, when people do approach me about it, and it's become something when I go out and about that people want to talk about it, they almost in secret, hey, I read that article, good job. Why are you hush-hush about it? Why are you shouting about it? People are ashamed, or frightened to say that this is not working, that this is a nightmare. And it is. When you think about the fact that it's taken all these months to prepare, supposedly they're going to have the entire strip shut down for 10 days leading up to it. Then there's the event. And how long is it going to take to disassemble all these barricades and the grandstands and any other things that they've put up to get us back to what would be normal, only to start it up again for the next race? This is going to be 10 years of agony for us.
Yeah. And
only certain individuals are going to reap the profits from it. In the meantime, the rest of us are sacrificing our personal time. We're stuck sitting in our cars in triple-digit temperature, wasting gas at $4 something a gallon to go absolutely nowhere. For somebody else's benefit, we have no power over this. It's not okay.
Well, and I mean, I know like they keep touting this number for Formula One of, they're saying $1.5 billion in revenue that it's going to bring to the city. And one of my recent episodes, I had a sports economist on to talk about the economic impact of sports. And a lot of this came off the tail end of the discussion about the $350 million going to the Oakland A's for their stadium. And he is a huge opponent of public money going into private sporting venues. He hates it. And I hate it too. I think it's terrible. There's so many other places that money could be spent. And he brought up a really good point with this whole, whenever they tout these huge figures for the impact of a sporting event, said usually you can take that decimal point and move it one spot to the left. So when they're saying it's going to be for Super Bowl, for example, $500 million of economic impact, it's probably closer to 50. It's not 500 million, because they put in, so they try and bring in so much to try to sell the benefits of this. And I think Formula One, as I say, I was really excited about it when it was first announced. And then I started to think about it and I thought, no, it's going to be a construction nightmare. Room rates are going to be through the roof. Ticket prices are going to be stupid. It's not going to be any fun. The locals are going to hate it. Everybody that I talk to that's a local, Kenny Davidson, good friend of mine, does his bow tie cabaret at the Tuscany,
which is right in the heart of the zone.
Exactly. He looked at it and went, I have no idea how I'm going to get to work. No idea how I'm going to get there to do a show or anything. It's an absolute shit show. And it, as you say, it sounds like the locals are they're done with it.
Well, all the people that work in the casinos that are surrounded by the racetrack have yet to figure out how they're going to get to the buildings. You can't cross the racetrack to get to Planet Hollywood or the Paris or anyone that's in that center. There are thousands of employees in every single one of those businesses. They have no idea how they're going to show up to work those days. They don't know. Are they going to build temporary bridges over that people are going to have to walk over, where they're parking on the opposite side somewhere? Nobody knows. And this is going to be we're in August, September, October, November, 3 months from now. These things should have been figured out years ago, months ago at the very minimum. They don't know how they're going to get to work. So how are the casinos going to operate if they have no employees in the building to service all of these people that are coming for the very event that's prohibiting employees from getting there?
Well, I can tell you from a tourist side, I experienced it at the end of May, and I was heading out to go do some shopping, and I grabbed a Lyft, and I was staying at Horseshoe and going up to the North Outlet Mall. And The drive out was super smooth. They were just in the process of putting up some barricades along Las Vegas Boulevard, blocking off southbound traffic to do some work, all this stuff. Coming back was a different story altogether. And my Lyft driver decided to take what he thought was a shortcut coming off of the 15 and going on the backside of Caesar's Palace. And he was going to come out through Caesar's Palace and go out onto the Strip. And I thought, okay, well, maybe he knows something I don't. I mean, I'm not going to say anything. I'm just the tourist. Yes, I'm here a lot, but I have a pretty good idea of getting around, but I'm not going to say anything. He's the Lyft driver. We sat in Caesar's Palace out front of that, by the parking lot, kind of by the main entrance, for at least 15, almost 20 minutes. And I finally just said, you know what, just stop my ride and let me off here and I'll walk over there. And he said, oh, are you sure? I mean, it's you're probably about a 20-minute walk from here, 15 minutes. And I looked and went, dude, we've been sitting here for 20 minutes and haven't moved. So I would rather walk and go. And I'm sure that I probably got to the hotel before he even got out of the parking lot and onto the boulevard. And it was a common complaint that I was hearing from everybody was how hard it was to get around. And that is still happening now. People are bitching about that.
Right. And if you had that one experience, that means that particular driver has that experience all the time. Combine that by the number of Lyft drivers. Imagine how many of them have just thrown up their hands and said, we're done with this. I'm not wasting 90 minutes of my time for one fare. Why? Same thing with taxi drivers. And I mentioned this in the article. The taxi drivers, some of them, I know one personally who had been working as a taxi driver for 20 years. That was his living. It was the only thing he did. Once this construction began, he was getting heat from the taxi companies that he wasn't driving enough people. How can you drive the same number of people when each individual ride suddenly takes 6 or 9 times the length to get there?
Yeah.
So he was getting fewer tips, way fewer fares, heat from the taxi company, and he just threw up his arms and said, I'd rather not do anything. So you're losing the Lyft drivers, you're losing the Uber drivers, you're losing the taxi drivers. The buses can't go through. I just added a quote this afternoon into that article because I've been constantly updating it, where this guy, who was a tourist, he commented on my article on my social media. I put that into the article. He said, I was there last week. The bus driver wasn't even charging anybody to get on the bus, and he was telling people as they were getting on, you may as well just walk, you'll get there quicker. The only thing that would have saved us would have been if the monorail actually went to the airport.
Yeah.
And most cities have a rail system that take you from the airport into the heart of whatever city you're visiting. It's a no-brainer, therefore it does not exist here.
So, I mean, the question then is, what's the breaking point? I mean, you've got people like me who have been 6, 7, 8 time a year visitors up until pre-COVID, obviously, and then not being able to come from Canada, but even following COVID, still making an effort, a conscious effort to be frequent visitors to the city. I've seen other tourist type bloggers and vloggers who have said, you know what? Fuck it. I'm done. I don't want to come anymore. I'm tired of it. What is the breaking point that is finally going to fix things? And I mean, any idea, prediction on a timeline on how long this is going to be before things are finally, they flip the switch and say, you know what? Yeah, we fucked up. We need to fix this.
I don't know if that's ever going to actually happen. And I'll tell you why. The tourist base that they're looking to grab right now is, one, the sports fan and the partygoers, the young people, the young crowd that wants to go into the nightclubs and go to the beach clubs during the day and spend. They waste a lot of money. I can be judgmental here and say out of sheer stupidity. They're not planning for tomorrow. We're coming to Vegas, Vegas woo, let's go crazy. There will always be young people that haven't had something to judge the Vegas experience by. They're going to come here, and what is our current situation is going to be their normal standard. They don't know any differently. And once they get tired of it, there's always going to be somebody coming up. The Vegas is hyped as a wild experience, and you can cut loose here. So the old folks are dying off. The young folks don't know any better, and as they pass, it just goes. So I think that it's going to continue to be that way, but I think you're right. So many people just saying, screw it, I'm not coming anymore. And I probably would do the same if I didn't absolutely love my job and love living here and have so many entertainment options. I'm a big entertainment person. I don't like seeing how the emphasis on sporting events is driving the entertainment industry down. That's always been my focus, and I almost feel like I'm trying to be a crusader to protect that. But I'm treading water, and so are we in that respect. The city of entertainment, it's kind of ironic. And I wrote articles about that, where some of the headliners here in the city, they have to take breaks from their resident shows and go on tours so that they can make the actual profit. Mm-hmm. And the reason that they're able to do that in other cities is they can market themselves as being direct from Vegas. That's a catch line. They will continue to perform here on a limited basis just so they could sell tickets in other cities.
Yeah.
So there's an irony there. Direct from Vegas with a catch is what I call the article. And I think it all boils down to a lack of logic. None of this makes any sense. Mm-hmm. Vegas never really did make any sense. It doesn't. I mean, there's so many contradictions. We shouldn't even be here. People don't belong in a city without or in a place without water, and natural environment that's lethal. We shouldn't be here. None of it makes sense. But even with that taken into account, the things that go on around us are absolutely nuts. You're either going to continue to roll along with it, or you're going to say, I've had enough. But there's always going to be somebody else rolling into town.
I think that's a really fair point to make about, as you say, it's almost kind of the old adage of, what is it they say? There's a sucker born every minute. And Vegas used to build itself, or used to tout itself on those repeat visitors. They loved the people that would come back, and they treated you so well if you came back over and over and over again, whether that was comp rooms, comp meals, comp show tickets, whatever. And now it kind of feels like they don't really care if you're a repeat visitor. They just want a warm body and an open wallet. And that's it. And that's all they care about at this point.
And that's why your aging resorts like Caesar's Palace or the Flamingo, they're falling into disrepair. New visitors want to go, and the newest attractions like the Sphere, which I felt this way the moment that it came online. And first of all, I was surprised when it actually did come online. But the focus was on, oh my God, Las Vegas has this new thing called the Sphere. We used to hear that kind of a response whenever a city would put a new Ferris wheel in. Suddenly, every major city had a Ferris wheel. It's the same with the Sphere. Every city's going to have one. The novelty will be gone like this. Mm-hmm. We're already not talking about it anymore. And my remark was, how soon before they start selling advertising on it and it just becomes a billboard? Yeah. It's already been announced. It started on September 4th, I believe. So it's going to be a big, giant billboard. And the world went crazy about an electric snow globe that's being repurposed as a billboard.
Sam, I appreciate your time, my friend. It feels like it's a depressing conversation, but it feels like a conversation that needs to happen. And it's that feeling of, as I say, it's been a what the hell has happened to Vegas situation. And your article came out and I looked and went, I got to get Sam on the show to have a talk about this, because I feel like you're the guy that knows and that understands. And, I feel like you and I are on the exact same wavelength on this, my friend.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I wouldn't say that it's depressing. I would say that it's frustrating, because we know that this can be a better place, that we can have better services. We just have to say, we're not okay with the way this is. Keep speaking out, putting our money where it matters, and objecting verbally in face-to-face if we have to. There are good things that are happening here. There are bad things that are happening here. But if you stay silent about them, the bad things are just going to continue. So let's rally around and fight that fight.
And that wraps up another episode of Jeff Does Vegas. If you've got feedback on this episode of the show, or any other episode for that matter, or you've got suggestions and ideas for topics you'd like me to cover on the podcast, please feel free to reach out to me via Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at Jeff Does Vegas. Or drop me an email directly at jeff@jeffdoesvegas.com. In the meantime, thank you so much for checking out the show. Be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts so you'll know the moment new episodes are available. And don't forget to visit jeffdoesvegas.com for past episodes and show notes. My name is Jeff, and this has been Jeff Does Vegas, a Walker New Media production.